super long story short, I adopted a ketogenic lifestyle. I was still consuming lots of plants. At the time, my spinach and, don't shout, my spinach and kale smoothies with my turmeric and black pepper. I was considerably healthier than I ever was prior to that. But I had noticed that I had managed to lose a considerable amount of weight, 107 pounds to be precise. But I was building lean muscle mass, a considerable amount of lean muscle mass, which I was told was impossible without carbohydrate. So I decided to prove how powerful this lifestyle was. I felt that I'd found a secret that nobody else was talking about, that was completely different to any other diet and lifestyle that I'd ever seen before. So I decided to enter an amateur men's physique bodybuilding competition, which everybody begged me not to do it because they knew I suffered severely with anxiety and depression. And I used to struggle to leave my house. That's how difficult the anxiety was. So the thought of walking onto a stage with hundreds of people was something that was unthinkable at the time. But I did. I came second in that comp. But I used to win on ratio and condition. And that's what bodybuilding is. It's almost an illusion. I was, as a keto athlete, I had a tremendous ability to strip to below 3% body fat. Wow. My skin was almost transparent, super vascular. And my ratios were incredible, when I was competition ready. And that's how I used to win. So I went back, I competed, I came second as a pro. And the year after that, I went back and I beat the gentleman that beat me that year. And I became a British champion. 2 years after that, I went on to the European Championship, which I'd won. I wanted to go the year prior. I did not go. I was invited, but I did not go because I was unvaccinated and I was unwilling to take a vaccination to go. Probably a controversial subject, but I didn't want to become vaccinated, so I missed that opportunity. So I decided to defer it for a year, and I went a year later. I won that just about. I entered two categories. I won one, and I came second in the other, which is brilliant. As the progression went on, it might have been just before the British Championship, I gravitated into a carnivore lifestyle. I understood and learned about the effects of plant toxins, and I learned that broccoli and spinach was not serving me. So I became carnivore. I noticed that I was even healthier and fitter than I was prior to that. Within the bodybuilding community, the majority of bodybuilders are supplementing, and that's a decision that they have made for their career, and that's fine. For me to progress down that road, I felt that I would have needed to have supplemented, and it's not something that I wanted to do. Again, I'm not against it, but it just wasn't the right fit for me. So I decided to come away because it would have meant for me to have built that extra mass naturally. I probably would have needed to have taken 5 years out of competing. I'm so glad that I did it. It's one of the biggest achievements in my life, and I'm super. It's something that I never imagined was possible, because coming back to the last podcast we did, I am not genetically gifted. I now do, I've gone into running and cycling over the last few months. I run with a running club, and it's a social thing. You meet up with these people, you go for a run, you have a chat, and you talk about goals, and everyone is so supportive. When you compete, they come and support you. I didn't have any of this when I was doing the bodybuilding. Nobody cared, So it's a complete different different look on competing. But so these are my 3 pillars for athletic performance. So in order to gain that athletic performance, we're looking at a good power to weight ratio. So we need to be powerful, but as light as possible. Now, regardless of what discipline we compete in, we need low body fat and we need more lean muscle mass. We need the ability to repair, rebuild, and recover. So for this, we need quality nutrients. We need bioavailable nutrients. And finally, we need lots of energy. We need energy on demand, superior energy, and lots of it. So these are my 3 pillars. Now, when we look at the standard type of diet, this is the Eat Well plate. The Eat Well plate is based predominantly on carbohydrate. Obviously, the protein percentage of this is going to change depending on whether we live in a standard lifestyle or whether we are an athlete. But generally, it predominates carbohydrates. And this is how it looks on our plate. And we cook these foods in vegetable and seed oils. Now, I'll be the first to admit that that looks healthy. We've got chicken on there, we've got pasta, we've got some tomatoes, peas, and bell peppers, etc. If you were to show that to a typical athlete, they would assume that is a highly healthy meal and cooked in vegetable oils. But to look at this power to weight ratio, we need to be able to lose body fat. We need low body fat and we need high rate of muscle mass. But everybody bases things on calories in, calories out. Now, energy needs to be accounted for, but the caloric model is highly flawed, and it's flawed for a number of reasons. The caloric model doesn't account for the effect of insulin, doesn't account for the thermic effect of food, metabolic rate, and ketogenesis. And we'll explain what each of these are now, but we need to understand that all carbs break down into sugar. So regardless of what source the carbohydrates are, they all break down into sugar. And this sugar breaks down to glucose. And the glucose is then stored in the liver and muscle as glycogen. But when these stores are full, it overspills and stores as fat. And this is how we typically store fat. So we don't store fat typically through the overconsumption of dietary fat. It's the overconsumption of carbohydrate in the form of glucose. Now, this is the mechanism that it goes through. So when we consume carbohydrate, the pancreas releases insulin. It upregulates an enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, which breaks the bonds on the glycerol backbone and signals the body to store fat. Now, this occurs in regardless of caloric value. If you consume carbohydrate, insulin signals the body to store fat. Now, this is a perfectly normal process. But for us to burn this fat for fuel, we need to almost perform this action in reverse, but we need another enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase. Hormone-sensitive lipase breaks the bonds again on the glycerol backbone and puts fatty acids into the bloodstream. The issue with this is that when insulin is elevated, insulin blocks hormone-sensitive lipase. It blocks our body's ability to put these fatty acids into the bloodstream. And in doing so, prevents our body's ability to burn this body fat. So to put this in perspective, if you wake up in the morning and you consume a bowl of muesli or some toast or whatever it may be to fuel your workout in order to burn fat, you are not burning fat because that increased insulin, it makes it biologically impossible for us to burn that body fat when insulin is elevated. We need insulin to drop back down in order to burn that body fat. So carbohydrates fueling your workout for the sake of burning body fat is absolutely counterintuitive. But these vegetable oils are high in an oxidized omega-6 called linoleic acid. Now, linoleic acid causes inflammation, it damages the liver, and leads to further insulin resistance. As a percentage, this linoleic acid is leading to 6% higher insulin resistance than carbohydrates do. It's also high in phytosterols, which lowers our natural cholesterol and causes all sorts of issues in regards to hormone production. Higher omega-6 intake is associated with weight gain in both animal and human studies. And as a side note, it also increases leptin resistance. So these vegetable oils that we are cooking these foods in, they tell the body to store fat. So it's not just the carbohydrate, it's also the effect, the fat storage effect of these vegetable oils, which brings me on to lectins. So on that plate, we had a lot of pasta, amongst other things, which we'll go into a bit more detail in as well. But grains are high in lectins. Lectins bind to insulin receptors and they signal the body to store 5 times more fat than insulin does itself. So to put that into perspective, if we had a bowl of muesli, which contained 100 calories, or a piece of steak, which contained 100 calories, the fat storage, the insulin, and the lectin effect of binding to those insulin receptors is signaling the body to store 5 times more fat. So all of these factors are breaking down the whole caloric theory. It's not the calories that govern whether we gain or lose weight. Leptin is a satiety hormone. It tells us when we're full, but lectins block leptin. They block our body's ability to tell us that we're full. So we've just taken out pillar number 1 purely through that meal, that dish, that plate that I've just presented is absolutely counterintuitive to losing that body fat and lowering our body fat and increasing lean muscle mass. On to my next pillar. So our body's ability to repair, rebuild, and recover. Again, we need quality nutrients and they need to be bioavailable. And I'm going to show you why that plate again is absolutely counterintuitive. Again, grains are also high in phytic acid as well as lectins. Now, other foods contain phytic acid and lectins as well, and we'll go into that a little bit later on. But this is a study that looks at zinc absorption. Now, phytic acid blocks the absorption of zinc, iron, and magnesium. Zinc is essential for the production of testosterone. Iron is important for supplying oxygen to the muscle to aid with building and repairing. And magnesium is crucial for supporting muscle and energy production. And what this study shows is that when we consume oysters, which are incredibly high in zinc, and we consume it with corn tortillas, that zinc absorption is blocked by 100%. 0 zinc is absorbed. So the food that we consume with our nutrient-dense foods has a massive impact on our body's ability to absorb those nutrients. So when we are consuming foods high in lectins and phytic acid, they block the absorption of these things. Now, testosterone, you may be thinking, well, we need testosterone to build muscle, but we all need testosterone. Even women need testosterone. So this isn't just about building muscle. Iron is essential, and so is magnesium. We all need muscle for life. So this isn't just a case of athletic performance. This is for health and well-being as well. But this is the effect that phytic acid has on the body. And we'll quickly go back to lectin. So this is my interpretation of the microvilli line of the gut. Very basic, I know, but when we consume food, the nutrients come in, they bind to the microvilli line of the gut, which are like little fingers that absorb nutrients. So we have all of this surface area to absorb nutrients. But what happens when we consume lectins is the lectins in the form of weak germ agglutinin, which is found in these breads, pastas, rice, they bind to these cells lining the microvilli or the line in the gut. And they take up the surface area. They almost do this, so reducing the surface area. So we're actually absorbing way less nutrients than we're consuming before. But when these lectins come into the gut, they bind to the epithelial cells or the enterocytes lining the gut, and they cause the release of a molecule called zonulin. And when zonulin's released, it causes a gap in the tight junction between these epithelial cells, which allows undigested protein molecules to travel into the bloodstream where they shouldn't be, and the body sees them as a foreign invader and creates antibodies to fight them. The issue with this is through a process called molecular mimicry. The body then starts attacking other proteins in the body that look the same. This is autoimmune disease. So these lectins will cause intestinal permeability in everyone. If we are consuming bread, pasta, rice, we have what's called leaky gut. We have holes lining our intestines in the gut. And this causes all sorts of issues, neurological issues, aches and pains in joints, fatigue, inflammation. So by consuming that plate that we just showed that contained pasta, which is a grain, that plate is absolutely counterintuitive to repairing and building, because the lectins and phytic acid on that dish is blocking the absorption of those amino acids and those fats that are found within the protein. That plate is absolutely counterintuitive to athletic performance because it's blocking our body's ability to repair, rebuild, and recover.
Plants will block your digestion, block your body's ability to absorb food, protease inhibitors in wheat and soy and many other plants that will block your protease enzymes from your pancreas, so you can't break down protein anyway. So even though you have perfectly bioavailable meat, if you're eating that in a sandwich, say, you're going to get these protease inhibitors, and that's going to disrupt your body's ability to break down meat even. So, when you eat meat with other things, it actually changes the way your body can digest and absorb and deal with them. And some people, when they say, well, I have a problem eating meat, I get upset stomach, I get bloating, I point that out to them. And then when they actually try eating just meat on its own, they find that, actually they don't get any bloating. They don't get any problems. And that's because they're actually absorbing what they're eating. It's not getting to the bacteria in their gut and causing problems and gas. You can have a lot of iron in spinach, but we're not getting it. There's a lot of niacin in corn, but we're not getting it.
Steak or beef, animal proteins are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. It's not the animal proteins that are causing the issue.
And think about that too. If something is bioavailable to us, it's 100% bioavailable to us, we're near that. That is obviously what we're biologically more predisposed, designed to eat. Any nutritionist who argues for a diet that's deficient in nutrients is not a good nutritionist, and is obviously held up by different sorts of narratives and ideologies. So, if we're designed to eat something like every other animal on Earth, that's going to be the thing that's most healthy for us. And if something is completely bioavailable to us versus something that's not completely bioavailable to us, maybe it's partially, maybe it has some poisons, maybe they're not that bad, but there's something there that we are not fully adapted to. We're not adapted to it, right? So that's not our biologically appropriate diet. End of story. And when animals eat their biologically appropriate diet, they are more healthy. That is a fact. And there's no reason to suspect that humans would be any different. You look at the rates of chronic diseases in native populations before they were introduced to Western food, it was zero, essentially. And so, Weston A. Price did a big study on that sort of thing. And it goes back hundreds of years to different anthropologists and explorers. So if you're eating what you're designed to eat, what you're biologically designed to eat, you're going to be more healthy. You're going to, for all those different reasons, because you're going to get all the nutrients, because you're not going to get anything bad with the nutrients. You're not going to get bad with the good. And if something is completely bioavailable, you have to think, well, maybe we're designed to eat this. Maybe we're more adapted to eat this. And if something is not completely bioavailable, something has some toxins that we aren't fully adapted and capable of disarming, then that means that we're probably not biologically designed to eat that thing. Well, why don't we eat our most bioavailable food that has no downside to it, which is fatty meat, and avoid the things that we aren't perfectly adapted for?
Why do you need a supplement when a piece of steak contains every one of those things in a highly bioavailable volume? It just makes perfect sense. Now, when we look at how we create energy or utilize energy, let's look at glucose. Glucose costs, so for us to process one glucose molecule, it costs the body 2 NAD plus molecules there and 2 there. So it's costing the body 4 NAD plus molecules. For us to process ketones in the form of beta hydroxybutyrate, it costs the body 1. So that makes energy production, ketone energy production, 400% more efficient at a cellular level. And all of these things, this decline in NAD plus to NADH leads to oxidative stress and aging. And this is why I believe that athletes who consume high levels of carbs early on in their career, they retire at a young age in their 30s, and they begin to age incredibly quickly, as well as gaining a lot of weight. And it's because of this oxidative stress and damage to their cells from the overconsumption of carbohydrate. So let's look at that again. So an elite athlete can store 10,000 kilojoules. A ketogenic athlete can store 150. That's 15 times more energy in stored fat. It's absolutely counterintuitive as an athlete, whether you're endurance or strength, to supply your body with an energy system that you need to keep topping up, that keeps crashing, when you can supply the body. I work with elite athletes, and I've got a really good one to show you a little bit later on. Some of these guys compete in Ironman for 10 to 14 hours, depending on their ability. Which is incredible. And some of these athletes I've been working with were fueled on nothing other than water and electrolytes for the entire event. They did not, and fasted. They did not eat before the event. They did not eat during the event. All they consumed was water and electrolytes for the entire event. Now, this is a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and a marathon. The carb athletes taking in these energy gels, having to stop in the toilet, because they're suffering with gastro distress from consuming 120 grams of carbohydrate every hour, which is not good for your digestive system. When ketones supply this superior energy, which is 400% more efficient. So this plate that we looked at in the beginning, we've got the pasta, high in phytic acid and lectins. We've got the tomatoes, high in lectins. The peas, high in phytic acid and lectins. The bell peppers, high in lectins. The spinach, high in oxalates. So that plate is a plate full of anti-nutrients. The most nutritious food or item on that plate is the chicken, and most of those nutrients within that chicken are being blocked by the other anti-nutrients on that plate. That plate for health and athletic performance is absolutely counterintuitive. So it was simple, and it's almost too simple. This is the magic elixir. This contains every vitamin and mineral that we need, not just to survive, but thrive. It contains everything that we need, from vitamin A down to zinc, choline, creatine, carnosine, taurine. Everything that we need is found in red meat, because protein carries a high thermic effect. So coming back to pillar 1 in regards to losing this weight, protein spends a large portion of its calories to digest, absorb, and process, around 25 to 35%. Carbs is 5 to 10, and fats is 0 to 5. So if we look at that image that we looked at the beginning of the macronutrient split of the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Now, if we were to swap the volume of carbohydrate to protein, but not change the overall caloric value, the thermic effect of that additional protein could allow us to burn an additional 380 calories per day. And I know we said it isn't the calories, but this is energy in the form of heat. We are wasting energy that we have eaten through doing nothing other than swapping out carbohydrate for protein. We also increase metabolic rate. So this is a fantastic study that looks at low carb, moderate carb, and high carb. The study was isocaloric, which means everyone was on the same calories. And what the study shows is that the low carb group increased metabolic rate to the sum of 278 calories on average compared to the high carb group. So when people say it's all about the calories, it's not the calories, it's what we are eating, it's what we are consuming. Going low carb increases metabolic rate. Consuming more protein increases thermic effect. Removing all of these carbohydrates is removing the body's ability to increase insulin and tell the body to store fat. Removing these lectins is removing the body's ability to bind to those insulin receptors and signaling the body to store fat. Removing the lectins is taking away the body's ability to negate the nutrients found within those foods. So that plate is absolutely counterintuitive. And now we've gone low carb. The glucose in the form of glycogen is now released from the muscle and is now sent into the bloodstream. And now we're able to become ketogenic, which we're live in a carnivore state. And this simply means that being ketogenic is our natural metabolic state. It's the metabolic state we're born in, and it's the metabolic state that we've evolved in our entire existence. Now, that should tell you everything that you need to know about being carnivore and ketogenic. This is the way that we are meant to live. This is how we spent our time hunting and catching our meals. We were in a ketogenic state. We did not spend days consuming carbohydrates every 2 hours throughout the day, which is the typical sort of bodybuilding diet, isn't it? Every 2 hours to get the protein in. We went days sometimes without food. Going days without food would put us into a state of autophagy, which is cellular repair and regeneration. And this allows us to increase the body's ability to heal and repair. And by doing so, we increase testosterone and human growth hormones. So fasting increases testosterone and human growth, brown fat activation and lipolysis and ketogenesis. We went days sometimes without food. Going days without food would put us into a state of autophagy, which is cellular repair and regeneration. And this allows us to increase the body's ability to heal and repair. And by doing so, we increase testosterone and human growth hormones. So fasting increases testosterone and human growth, brown fat activation and lipolysis and ketogenesis. But when we do this, the fat cell now releases those fatty acids into the bloodstream. It's sent to the liver converts them into ketones, and these ketones are sent to the mitochondria in the cell for us to use for energy. And this is how a ketogenic athlete or someone living a keto carnivore lifestyle gets their energy. And the beauty from doing this is that a state of low insulin and elevated ketones or a ketogenic state activates uncoupling or increases the activity of UCP1, uncoupling protein 1. Now, this signals our stored fat to act in the way that brown fat does. So I'm sat in front of you. My body is literally wasting energy. My fat cells are literally just burning energy. So energy or heat needs to be accounted for. But the caloric intake that I have consumed is not an accurate gauge by any means, because I now consume well over the caloric value that I used to when I was consuming carbs. Some days I consume between 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, and I still maintain single figure body fat. Whereas when I was consuming carbohydrate at 2007, I would gain weight or fat regularly. Every week I would gain a pound or two. Now, these ketones, we're breathing them out and we are peeing them out. The beauty of this is that ketones supply superior energy. Carbs is an inefficient energy source. So what I used to find when I was working for an engineering company before I began working for myself, my energy was spent spiking and crashing throughout the day. So I'd wake up in the morning, I'd eat a bowl of cereal with a banana because I believed it was healthy. So in effect, I was having sugar with my sugar. And then I was hungry. So 10 o'clock in work, I'd have a cup of coffee with a biscuit. And then that would work for a while. And then I was hungry again. And lunchtime, I'd have chicken and pasta because that's healthy, right? Well, it isn't, you know. I was soon hungry again and then crashing. And then I was eating cakes and crisps at 3 o'clock. My day was spent spiking and crashing. And come 3 o'clock, if I could not get my hands on food, I would have hunted down a small child just to eat something, you know. Now, I do become hungry living a carnivore lifestyle, but I never become hungry. And I get to the point where I think throughout the day, you know, I could do with eating some steak. I'll get pulled to one side with a call, an email, a constitute, whatever it may be. 10 minutes later, I've forgotten about it. That is out of my head. I am no longer hungry. I've forgotten that I was even hungry. 4, 5, 6 hours later, oh yeah, I was just about to put a steak on, you know? So You don't pick up because your body taps into this stored energy source. We've got an unlimited supply of energy. And what we do is we seamlessly flick this switch from dietary fat into body fat. And this is what people don't seem to comprehend when we live a ketogenic carnivore lifestyle. We have all the energy that we need stored in our body fat. When it comes to athletic performance, there's a few arguments in regards to why ketones will not work. One is, and you get this from powerlifters and bodybuilders. Well, I need carbs to lift heavy weights. Mm-hmm. Well, when you're lifting heavy weights, you're doing 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 reps. Now, you were not hitting the glycolytic energy system, which is where the carbohydrates come into. When you were lifting heavy weights, you were using the PC system, the phosphocreatine energy system. This lasts typically between 10 to 13 seconds, depending on whether you're supplementing with creatine or whether you were consuming lots of meat. But the PC system does not use glucose. We do not use any carbohydrate to lift heavy weights. So when you become ketogenic, as long as you are having adequate sodium, and sodium is found in the foods we eat, or we can add sodium through pink Himalayan or Celtic sea salt or some form of salt. This is not going to, it may impact those lifts initially as your body's adapting. So typically we'll drop off the edge of a cliff, but this will soon upregulate as the body adapts. But strength quickly comes back. Now, and I was going to go into powerlifting before I decided to do the running and cycling. And the reason is that I work with a powerlifter who is number 2 in Britain in his category. And I am strong. I was stronger than he was. Maybe not now because I'm not training so much. 165 pound. My top bench press is 165k. My power to weight ratio was pretty good. I decided to go into the running and cycling, but it just goes to show that no, I do not consume carbohydrate yet. You know, I'm for my size. That's fairly strong. No, I was supplementing with creatine. Now there is an argument you don't need to because it's found in high amounts in red meat, but I did supplement with creatine. Creatine is fantastic. I love creatine. It's not just good for the muscle; it's good for the brain. But you do not need carbohydrates for heavy lifts. Now the aerobic system, which is our long distance stuff, we're tapping into fat stores. So that's a no-brainer. You know, we know that fat and ketones is superior on that. Now, the only question is on the glycolytic energy system, which comes into question for those high intensity bouts. So maybe someone on an Ironman who's on the bike, who needs to push up a hill and really give it some, they believe that they need carbohydrates to tap into their energy system, but we don't. Being ketogenic or keto-adapted carnivore, the body upregulates the lactic acid system. So what happens is the muscle will build it up with lactate, and our muscle will send that lactate to the liver, and the liver will convert it into glycogen and send it back to the muscle at a higher rate, arguably, than a carbohydrate athlete. These studies compared what they classed as ketogenic athletes to carb athletes, and they did show that the carb athletes outperformed the ketogenic athletes by a long margin. But these studies were not done on the proper grounds because it takes time to adapt to become ketogenic. It takes time to upregulate certain systems and enzymes within the body. And as we know, this can be as long as 6 months. The people within those studies had been ketogenic or consuming fat for as little as 3 weeks. They were not supplementing with any electrolytes. They had poor salt intake, and their diet with, as far as protein and amino acids, were incredibly low. These are all things that we need for life, not just athletic performance, and they were devoid of all of these things. So those studies, I question to a high degree. But as we adapt, we adapt our body's ability to upregulate the carnitine palmitoyl transferase pathways and the MCTs, the monocarboxylate transporters, not to be confused with medium chain triglycerides. When we upregulate these systems and enzymes within the muscle, we become a lot more fat adapted. Our bodies can supply this energy to the muscle at a much higher level, arguably, than carbohydrates. So it takes time to upregulate these systems and enzymes and pathways. And this is what's shown in this study. This is a famous study by Jeff Olek. And this study shows that I think this was done on muscle biopsy level. So they tested the athletes at a muscle biopsy level and tested glycogen levels. And what they found is that the keto-adapted athletes who had adequate time to adapt contained equal levels of glycogen in the muscle before, during, and after an event compared to the carbohydrate group. And it's a famous study, and I know it's one that gets thrown around a lot, but it's always worth repeating. This is part of fat oxidation, the rate that we can utilize fat for fuel. The keto adapted athletes increased fat oxidation by over twice as much as the carb athletes. But we saw this in the first study, in one of these studies. But their body's ability to utilize that fat wasn't high enough. They could not perform at a high VO2 max. But in this study by Jeff Olek, they showed that we can upregulate these systems and these enzymes, and we can utilize our VO2 max at a much higher rate. And this is what this shows. And I've got a cracking slide to show you a little bit later on in regards to an athlete I've been working with. But the high carb athletes had at very low rates, of fat oxidation. But the keto adapted athletes were still able to metabolize fat at an average rate of 1 gram per minute of 82% of VO2 max. Now, one of the athletes I've been working with has blown this out of the park in real terms. Yeah, so this basically, despite these marked differences in fuel between low carb and high carb athletes, there was no significant difference in resting muscle glycogen levels. Just adds further weight to the fact that we can upregulate this lactic acid system and provide our body with glycogen as well as ketones. So we become dual fueled. We can tap into our ketones. We can tap into glycogen stores. So we can still hit these high intense bouts that we need to power up those hills.